Welcome to the Ideal Spaces Working Group podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an Ideal Spaces podcast featuring Dr. Ulrich Gehmann and Grant Rainham, and we invite
Jason Montgomery. So I am an architect and a professor academic at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and I'm very happy to be here with the two of you today to discuss our latest workshop. This workshop is going to focus on identity exploring it through the lens of citizenship, of place, of a sense of belonging. And, this is apropos at this moment in time when, a sense of disruption is really occurring worldwide, where social political systems seem to be unsettled or being disrupted. And it's a time when many people might be questioning their relationship to citizenship and identity in their places. So certainly for myself as an American, I feel like the country I grew up in and knew from my youth and what made it special to be an American, all of that's coming into question now. And the future of my lifetime, and certainly for my kids' lifetime, it's unclear what the United States is going to be like as a country. And I could have never thought that possible. So I feel my identity and my citizenship is coming into, a period of uncertainty at the very least.
Do you think identity in general, if we talk about societal, even let's think about the self, do you think identity is going to really go through a transition alongside everything that's going on in the present time? Because we have socioeconomic, political transition. Yeah.
Right. I think so. I think identity, I think in a borderless world, where people are able to interact with, ideas or images or thoughts from people all over the world, I think the, identity is becoming maybe potentially more ambiguous, not always, but I think it for many people it might be, especially if people are living, in kind of placeless territories, which I would suggest, a lot of the American suburban realm is kind of a placeless territory.
There's an interesting aspect. Let's think of the relation between place and identity as it is positive topic in a positive old sense, place, citizenship, identity. Why this theme is of importance today, perhaps more than ever?
Yeah, I think the sense that kind of stability in the world, obviously opportunity, there's in many countries, there's been a sense that the future is going to be better than the past, that parents think that their kids are going to be able to achieve things that they've never achieved. And that's going to be through education, hard work, economic opportunity. I think the climate in the world right now is throwing a lot of challenges to those assumptions. And I think without those assumptions, people start to really feel less secure. And I think that's means their identity is kind of under duress, and they have to figure out how to maneuver in that situation. So I think it's really putting people in a position where they have to, work for their own resilience in a way that maybe they felt it was more natural in the past and it would come to them. So I think the kind of ways people in society are, there's a trend or a kind of condition that's putting all that in question. And I certainly when you're an older person looking at this, it's easy to say, well, in my youth it was different, but I definitely feel it's like a radical change from the world I've known most of my life. And it's only in the last, like even like 8 years or so that I feel like this is like turned upside down. So I think people, especially young people, are going to need to find their path through this, and their sense of identity, their sense of belonging, and citizenship in the sense of privileges and obligations that go with citizenship. All those things are going to help determine whether it's a brighter future or not.
This is a good point. As regards citizenship and places and the relation of citizens to places as a source of identity. What if, it's a provocative question, what if all this is no longer necessary, is no longer needed, because we have a new kind of public space, a large one, no? The internet-based, social media-driven, let's call it space. No?
Yes, yes.
And combined with a myth of omnipotence and unrestricted individualism. We do not need citizenship. We do not need public places. These are all outdated things from the past.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important challenge and question. And I think what it poses is that we are either seeing that the significance of physical place to all these things is either gone, it's eroded entirely, it's on the way to be eroded, or it's actually it's being muddled, that its importance is being muddled, but its importance remains. So, and I think that, one way to examine that will be questioning, whether there are certain aspects of the human as social creature, the human condition, that are pervasive and relatively universal and unchanging, even over thousands of years. And that's, that the position of looking at the human condition being more unchanging is supported by thousands of years of city making by human people, and the social interaction that comes with that type of concentration of population.
You just mentioned the city. I mean, where is the city going to be in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Well, certainly we know that, the UN reports all the time that the world is continuing to urbanize. China obviously has really pushed and forced urbanization in a serious way. Scholars like Edward Glaser at Harvard talk about, that for, say, poverty-stricken towns in the rural countryside of Brazil, the people see a better future for themselves, even if they're living in the informal, communities around the city centers, because the economic opportunity is there, the educational opportunity is there for their kids. So even if the life is really tough in those informal places, so the push of how, and it's of course maybe globalization and all the different forces economically around the world, but people are finding a future in urban conditions. Now, that's not universal. Essentially, that's most of the world, but say some advanced economies like the United States, it might be a little bit more the opposite, that cities are remaining pretty stagnant in their populations, and suburbanization continues to grow. One example of that is Texas, where the city of Dallas continues to have population growth, but the population growth keeps going north. And in essence, exurb after exurb is being developed, ranch land and farmlands being, bulldozed for housing development. And literally the city of the metro area of Dallas is now reaching the Oklahoma border. So, and it's always because the newest one is the best one. The other ones get urbanized and people already are saying, well, when my suburb gets too dense, I want to move to the next suburb that's less dense again. So the United States might be a counterpoint to that worldwide trend of urbanization. And, you know, there might well be a correlation between that American condition and the inability to like come together as a country now, because the national identity is kind of falling apart in these different, because people live in very different contexts now.
We talk about the centers of the cities in America, because if we look at the U.S. model, like San Francisco's, Los Angeles's, New York's, there seems to be a trend for the uncoring of the central core of the city. So what's going to happen to these central cores now?
Well, the central cores, right. So the cores, the American downtown was really formulated around, the zoning, which began to divide where people live from where they work or where things are made, and so forth. So, that's where we got an American downtown with, in New York's case, high-rise districts of office towers, same in all of these cities. And those those seem to be efficient, they seem to be intelligent under the zoning of the time, but the reality became that we recognized that on weekends and in evenings, those places were deserts of people, nobody. And that meant they were, there was no economic activity happening there, but it was also perhaps a dangerous place to be in those parts of the city because you were on your own. So these places now have an opportunity to be remade. So in the United States, again, having studied and researched American cities a bit, I tend to focus on them more than other places. But the back to work, the question of what COVID, the disruption that COVID caused relative to the workplace continues to be felt, and it opened the door to a more flexible lifestyle, but also even for employers who would like to have their employees back, they recognize the value of shedding all this overhead for expensive office space. And so they're willing to have hot desks and have people there 3 days a week. And that's opening up older commercial real estate to be reformed around mixed-use residential, which means American city centers actually are going to become richer, not richer financially, or they might be financially, but richer in terms of more activity, more different types of neighborhoods, more diversification of lifestyles and things of that sort. So that's happening at the same time that the Dallas area is just almost replicating a kind of placeless suburb, and they just keep growing, ad infinitum without any plan and with no sense of the absurdity of what they're providing for people.
Let's go to the absurd aspect.
Yes.
And when we take this example of the American cities, at least many European cities have a comparable, not the same, but a comparable problem. The city centers are for shopping, not for living.
Right.
You cannot really live there because the rents are too high, and in the best case in European cities, if they have a historical core, the city centers are a kind of open air museum for the tourist business.
Yeah.
All these cases, the American case and these kind of European cases, they do not provide places for citizens. We have just masses of people wandering around, consuming, and they are not living in the city. There are no citizens in this sense, no? And they do not need places in the traditional understanding that we have a piazza, a marketplace where we really meet and where we really enjoy to be there, to live. No? And this relates to identity again. Seen from this background, what makes our common workshop, no? What makes it important in your eyes?
Yeah, I think, I think its importance, number one, is to really interrogate, as Grant, you said a few minutes ago, what is the future of the city for humanity? And we should we should interrogate that, because I think it's I suspect that that cities provide a meaning of place, a human contact on a daily basis, a camaraderie with strangers that is that we will find will be a kind of path out of the morass of like social disruption and uncertainty that we have now. So I think this workshop is interrogating those questions, and it's really like, can we find enough evidence to support that cities continue to be, as they've been throughout human history, a solution to the human condition, right? Like a natural response to the human condition.
Mhm.
Do you think like the overfold of COVID, let's say the isolation of people working at home, or working outside of a central core where there was a group of people every day,
Right.
are we really creating a non-dialogue society for the future? And on top of that, with the third world of the internet, of social media, are those two things going to really create a non-entity of society or community anymore?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I do think that's right. And I do think, like all things in society, I think the pendulum swings back and forth. And I do think, in a way, the social culture of, say, the workplace does need to be kind of rebuilt a little bit. I was just I was doing a special event in an office I used to work in Manhattan. And I, with my client, where they let us come to the office and make use of the space. And the client that I'm working with looked at all the young architects sitting in their cubicle, and they're like, it's as quiet as, you can hear a mouse squeak in this space. And so she was kind of shocked that there wasn't more like this jovial interaction. People are even sitting at their desk and talking to somebody else on the next floor up over the internet, rather than actually walking upstairs and having a face-to-face meeting. So I do think, the scar of COVID is going to be around for a while, but I do think there is some creative need to rebuild social culture. But businesses are usually pretty good at that, because when they're worried about retention, when they're worried about productivity and all these kind of things, they tend to often try to bring perks to the office, build social connection. We've seen the .com companies doing that extensively, right, with all the perks coming with these jobs. So I think there is work to be done there, and that's if our workshop helps interrogate that cities in terms of daily lifestyle are a foundation, and then the other points of contact and enrichment, such as your work with your colleague. And I, full disclosure, I met my wife at the office. We were an office romance when that was allowed.
Yeah, and working the most time of your life, no?
Yes.
Or at least has been work time.
Yes.
When people you most frequently met were your colleagues,
yeah,
if you want it or not.
I mean, my best job ever was when I was in London in grad school, and I just finished school, and I got a full-time job with the architect I was interning with. And this was when there was one computer in the architect's office, and that was the person at the front desk. No one else had a computer. We were drawing by hand. We had 4 tables all together, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, facing each other. And all day long, we were drawing, and we were talking about our work, or we were just chatting. But we could do that while we were working. And we had eye contact, face to face, no barriers between us. And certainly that was like a golden moment for me in the workplace. When I moved to New York, now it was a cubicle, now it was a computer. Still had a very, like my initial time in New York in the late 90s, early aughts, was very social when I was 30-something person, young professional. But definitely that time of literally how you're configured in the space and you're able to work in conjunction with each other. That might be a world that's now in the past because of digital tools just being at our disposal.
Yeah, there's a tendency and there's a danger at the same time. This again, for me, as this again relates to Grant's question.
Right.
This is another social culture.
Yes.
And there might be evolving social cultures which are not social any longer.
Right.
No?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's, I think that's, one of the questions that raises is how much, like, obviously there's some things that feel inevitable, like that's the flow of time, that's the flow of the trend of our moment. And other things maybe are within our power to influence the outcome. And so I think I suspect we're going to find that walking out your front door in a neighborhood where other people, there are pedestrians around you, people out of cars, where you're doing daily activities and errands, you're riding on a bus or public transit with other people you don't know, you're going to work or you're going to school, that contact, I think is the foundation of a urban culture. That daily contact, and I'm always saying this with Jane Jacobs' words in the back of my head, and she says, it's the mostly fortuitous contact with strangers that builds a commonality, a sense of communal to some degree, and most importantly, a level of public trust.
This could be a good point, the public trust.
Yes.
Because the public trust
yes.
is eroded away.
Yes. And so you have to look at the conditions by which public trust is eroded and then say, is there a way to counter the erosion of public trust? And I think, so I lived through New York, through 9/11 in New York, through about blackout in New York, through Superstorm Sandy in New York. Like New York's seen a lot, and through the wildfire smoke of New York, which was unbelievable. But through those events, I always felt the power of the communal in the face of adversity. I felt that that day-to-day contact did put a foundation of public trust that allowed, the community to allow strangers to rise up and address the problem right in front of them, or feel the camaraderie that we're in this together and we have to address this together. So I think I'm an optimist ultimately, and I think there's an urban component of nature and nurture, especially for young people. Just let me point out, so my son and daughter were born and bred in the Upper East Side of New York. And by the way, that's the densest neighborhood in the United States by far. Almost 100,000 people per square mile in that neighborhood. So it's a very interesting place to say be a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old and then a tween and then a teenager. And I think when it comes to identity, my son who's now going to be 19 in December, he has street smarts, he has confidence, he kind of radiates confidence to other people. So they respond to that confidence and so forth. He's in college now, where a lot of his classmates grew up in the suburbs like I did, and he's a city boy, and everyone kind of notices that, and it kind of gives him, he's a leader amongst his peers. And I think that's through a kind of identity with like an inward strength that came out of his an urban lifestyle, right? An urban exposure to diverse people, a sense that the city he has a right to the city. He can move through the cities he likes. He feels safe and confident moving through the city, even on his own. And now he's into photography, and his passion is to photograph the subway, photograph people, on the streets in the rain or something like that. And so there's a recognition of that he's part of this bigger social, order in the city, that he really, so he's built that. And I think, and it's not that he's a special case. I think it's really, I see that with the kids of New York City all the time. I think
this relates to identity.
Yes.
This inner order, this at least is felt, no?
Yes.
If not conscious, is felt in order.
If I can tangent,
Yes. Okay.
and I don't mean to tangent too far, but let's take a model that's like this. More technology keeps affecting life every day.
Yes.
AI, all these things, millions of people lose their work. There's no jobs.
Right.
Where does that leave community and society when people don't have the ability to have the finance to live in community because there's no work?
Yeah. Well, certainly, yes. And so that I'm probably as above my pay grade to fully address that question. But the I mean, is so here's just an interesting aspect of that. When I was in the American educational system in the 70s, you know, we did trade stuff in our junior high education. I learned mechanical drawing. I learned woodwork. I made my own sweatshirt from cutting the pattern and sewing it all together. I did foundry work with metal, and that was standard across the United States because it was recognized that many people are not going to go to college, and many people might actually find working with their hands really fulfilling and going into trades or other types of pursuits other than college. And now it's taken us almost a couple generations to recognize the huge mistake to go away from that model and suddenly push society into a position where everyone is supposed to go to college. And the only way anyone could possibly succeed would be to go to college. So the millions of people that are going to lose work are losing work in jobs that are, you know, maybe digitally based, you know, management based and so forth. Well, at the same time, we need, you know, we're in a huge shortage of nurses around the country. We're in a huge, like, plumbers make a lot more money than I do. I can tell you that. They all have a boat in a country house, which I don't have either as an architect. So I talking to young people, I hear that we're, you know, like, if I could get a job where I like went out and worked all day with my hands and did something physical, and then at the end of the day I was done, I was paid well, and I could relax with my family and I could go on vacation. Like, there's actually a return to seeing the value of other types of jobs. And these are jobs that often, you know, certainly AI is not replacing plumbing, and it's not replacing nursing. You know, there's certain, so I think there's a little bit of hope in the sense that there's going to hopefully be more of an alignment of how young people are growing into a career path that's going to help them, you know, be independent, have a family, have the future they, whatever their desire is for their future, have good housing, among most important things. And that it's things that the AI disruption won't be hitting directly. And actually, there's still the gap that's going to be there. It's not going to solve the scale of potential that AI's disruption could cause, but at least that's a little glimmer of hope in the face of that, I think.
Can I just ask one other question, and then I can turn it over to Ulrich? But I mean, basically, architecture. What is the function of architecture for the next 30 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm working on a project now where I've never used AI for design ever, and I don't really ever intend to. But I'm definitely working with part of the team that comes from another practice. They're using AI actively, and I think I see the impacts of that. And so it's definitely, there's no doubt that AI, generative design through AI is growing. It might mean that, because everyone likes to be an architect. Everyone says, oh, I can design my own house. You know, I don't need to hire an architect. There are all the decoration shows and things going on TV that show people how to do these things. So I think architecture could very well, you know, look pretty different 20 years from now. I think you know, among the most important things architects do is serve their clients' needs and analyze their clients' needs, critically examine them, and help the client understand their own needs. I think AI could probably do some of that work, but I think there's a human element. There's an interaction, daily interaction with a client. There's the bringing to bear, you know, decades of experience. that it's going to be tough to totally erase that. What I think you're going to see is like the people that do that well, whether or not they're using AI as a design piece, they're still going to need to do that well. And it might be that there are fewer jobs for, say, young students out of college because AI is like doing some of that initial design work that you may have in the past assigned to, say, a young, new staffer in the firm to do that.
So right now, with the sort of transcending identity, as we brought up earlier,
Right.
Architecture has always been based on creating what identity is in society and in community. Is
Yes.
that going to stay the same?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I come from a unique architectural perspective in the sense that there's a small segment of architectural education that introduces students to classical thinking about architecture and traditional thinking about architecture. You might say that contemporary architectural practice has often been could be fairly described as creating placeless places, right? That it's anonymous, that you go to 5 different cities and around the world and you feel like you just saw the same building in those 5 cities, even though the cultures might be radically different. So I think architecture has dropped the ball in the last, certainly number of generations, where architecture has kind of forgotten how to help create identity and to say what is a local tradition, what's the material palette, what is the gestalt of a place that can help build a bigger vision for a place and maintain and grow an identity, evolve an identity that's existing, rather than working in total contrast to that identity, or not even worrying about gestalt and identity, just worrying about individual expression. So I think these are ways that you could critique architectural practice and trends. I think there are schools like ours which are trying to help students recognize identity and recognize what tradition can mean in the most positive and even progressive sense, right? And that's not a contradiction, right? To think of architecture as a language that's expressing the community and the identity. So I think there are people working on that question, and hopefully the architectural profession will continue to grow around that question. But certainly if AI grows within the practice of architecture in the office, then I think we're going to see that collapse, because AI obviously is so far, unless there's a breakthrough in this, which I can't, and I don't know the algorithms and all the nuances of AI, but I'm skeptical that AI is going to be able to do anything other than take a pixel and put it in a certain place and pretend that that's an architectural idea.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to this relation between identity, citizenship, and architecture. If we conceive architecture as the built space and the built space as a basis for citizenship and hence a sense of belonging provided by the architectural setting and hence of identity, we would need a different kind of architecture. No? And this would presuppose a different kind of political and economic frame conditions.
Yes.
When we are forced as architects, when we are forced to produce en masse with the help of AI, the most in the end, the most economic solution. This means a solution that could be good for ants, but not for humans.
Yes.
How to change this?
Yeah, similar to our conversation, or what we said a few minutes ago about people people are looking for fulfillment, right? So if young people are, through social media influence or through their lived experience, if they're looking for identity, if they're looking for meaning, many of them are seeing like something physical and tangible in their hands is a pathway to that.
Mm.
And there's definitely been a kind of great interest in craft. So, for example, when Notre Dame burned in Paris, obviously architects around the world had all the ideas to modernize Notre Dame. When the political community and maybe a lot of the social community in France said, no, we're going to rebuild it the way it was. What did that mean? Well, it turns out in France, there's some serious training schools, programs in traditional architectural craft. So they jumped into the picture. There were a lot of experts in France who could, and there was a lot of study of the old building. And so in France, but even on my campus in Washington, D.C., they built a truss for the cathedral using the traditional methods, because that was like we had lost this beloved building that has a world iconic power, and what it did was it inspired people to say, hey, we can make it just like they did in hundreds of years ago with our hands using those techniques, and we appreciate it, and that's a form of authenticity we're really excited about.
This is a point, I think, a general point of importance, in my view at least, also as regards our workshop.
Yes.
It's the relation between authenticity and identity.
Right.
And authenticity, amongst other factors, relates to architecture, to the built space.
Right. Well, just to go back to something we alluded to earlier, so we think of world cities being kind of turned into tourist kind of entertainment zones and so forth. You and I were in Barcelona a couple summers ago for a conference, and my wife and daughter and I were there, and we did the one thing you should never do in a city, which is rent an apartment to stay in, because that's a huge part of the problem. Barcelona, they had like 50-some thousand units that were being put into short-term leases for people like me coming there and renting them, which means somebody in Barcelona can't live in that space. We did, at least, having committed that terrible crime of doing that, we did at least stay in a neighborhood, and we stayed in a neighborhood because I saw this square in Google Maps, and I said, oh, if we're going to stay in that place and we're near that square, that's awesome. And so when we got there, the first night we were just settled in, we're like, well, where are we going to go to dinner? And then it dawned on me, oh yes, that square that's right around the corner. We went and found that square, and it was a neighborhood square. It is where real Barcelonans live. And the square was filled with young people who were chit-chatting, at that 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock hour. We were hungry. We realized in Barcelona you're not supposed to be hungry till 10 o'clock because that's when you're supposed to eat. But so we had to order food early. But it was really inspiring to be in that space, which were true local citizens of the city, and that was their living room, and it was the traditional lifestyle. Now, a number of blocks to the east was the tourist world of Barcelona, and we weren't in that part, which was great. So there are remnants, right? And actually Barcelona then, I think this past year, they took those 50,000 units and they took them out of short-term rental and are giving them to local residents. So I think there are fixes. Again, it's a pendulum swinging, and how to deal with, you talked about mass things many times, Ulrich, and I think this is mass tourism is obviously a huge issue that can totally overwhelm places and spoil it for the locals and spoil it for anyone who loves that as a place. And I think we have to find the right way to fix that, because one person's mass tourism is another person's economic opportunity. So that's a conflict that we just have to try to resolve.
In particular for local residents,
yes,
depending on the
local tourist. Yeah, so many places in the world, they want to build their tourist economy because that's a great opportunity to build their economy. Yes. Yeah.
To earn your living.
Yes.
Okay. As regards our workshop, no?
Yes.
The relation between citizenship in general, identity, authenticity, and place. What could be done? Let's think utopian a bit,
yes,
in a positive sense.
Okay.
What could be done to enlarge these small ecological niches where true citizenship still exists?
I'm not sure I really know. I think I think you've done a good job in writing and talking to me about, going back to the etymology of civitas, civis, right, from the Roman sense of it. And I think that's, and definitely the sense of it's a privilege and it's an obligation in combination. And I think somehow that's got, the recognition of privilege and the understanding of obligation is got to be somehow the incubator place for citizenship.
It's an important concrete point
to try to, I mean, so like when John F. Kennedy, really tried to get like AmeriCorps and service and the Peace Corps and all these types of things, that was around, and that's been perpetuated somewhat, since his time. My sister was in the Peace Corps, for example, and to take AI, unemployed people and put them in, give them a service opportunity, service opportunities. I mean, anytime somebody's exposed to the opportunity to do service, whether it's through a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a community group or a school project, it has profound consequences. When you recognize that you're doing something for somebody else and you're doing it totally for no personal, gain as your goal, you do get the gain of like recognizing how important that was and how you just gave something to somebody. You provided something they needed. So I think those, that takes a coherent culture that like says, okay, let's get together and let's learn what it's like to serve. And then when we do that, we're kind of growing people, future, our citizenship is being nurtured and evolving, and we recognize how privileged we are, and we recognize that we owe some back, right? And there are other people that could use the opportunities that we had, and so we can bring that to bear for them.
Okay, it's a good point. It's a good point. I think also for our workshop, when we are speaking about some preconditions to be met, and some basic assumptions about a generalized human condition.
And I think to the audience watching this, we're referring to a workshop. We're here in October 19th and 20th in Germany. By the time this podcast come out, we'll have done a workshop with Jason and Ulrich and a few other major players from London and Italy. And just so you know, we will on our website and through our internet connection have ongoing programming of the podcasts and everything involved with it, plus the filming of it, as well as storyline over the next several months. So just so you know that if you're watching this podcast and we're wondering what the workshop or quote unquote symposium is all about.
Yeah, this is an important announcement because in this direction, our general intention is to make podcasts in the way, not as podcasts, but as true dialogues.
Yes.
As we started this today.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's great.
And I want to say thank you to Jason for being here, and we look forward to working with him in the workshop the next 2 days. And we thank our audience, and we look forward to your input if you watch this, because we'd like to know what you think.
Yeah.
Thank you both. It's been really a pleasure to be here and to be at the foundation physically, to be in a real place.
Okay.